Good evening, participants. Welcome back to lecture number 2 of this 14-day lecture series on literary schools and movements. And today, as you can see on the screen, there are three areas that our resource person will be discussing. That is the Metaphysical, Cavalier, and the Sons of Ben. And among us, we have Dr. Bosudha Bandyopadhyay. Some of y'all might be aware of her. Some of y'all might have attended her lecture prior to this series. And on behalf of Team DAATH VOYAGE, I welcome you. It's difficult to have you because of your assignments. So we are glad you are here today, and I'm sure the participants will enjoy your deliberation. And on behalf of Team DAATH VOYAGE, I would also like to take the honor and opportunity of introducing our resource person of the day, Dr. Bosudha Bandyopadhyay, who presently is working as an assistant professor in the Department of International Languages at Chitkara University, Punjab. Prior to this, she has worked as an assistant professor of English in National Defense Academy, Pune, before joining Chitkara University. She completed her master's in English from Calcutta University, MPhil in English Literature from Pune University, and PhD from University of Mumbai. So a full pan-India experience that she possesses of academics. She also has been a Gandhian Eco-Philosophy Fellow at Environment Planning and Coordination Organization, Government of Madhya Pradesh. She is currently editing a book tentatively titled Religion, Religiosity, and the Perspective of a Reoriented Human Civilization, which appears to be very interesting. And I'm sure we would love to read it when it's released. So on behalf of Team DAATH VOYAGE, I welcome you. Thank you. It's always a pleasure and honor to have young, dynamic, knowledgeable resource scholars like you all. Without wasting much time, the platform is all yours. Over to you. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Thank you so much, Dr. Shoikat Banerjee. Without you, this entire module is absolutely unimaginable. And thank you very much for giving me this opportunity to connect with students all across. I hope that by the end of the lecture, you will be able, there will be certain takeaways and you will be able to understand these three areas that I'm going to discuss today. That's the metaphysical, the poetry, and the poets, cavaliers, and sons of Ben. Right, so let's just start. So these are the three broad areas which we will be discussing on. And so before any genre, so when we are discussing any genre, be it poetry, be it novel or drama, unless and until we know the history, we know the socio-political background, it's very difficult to understand from where this is coming. So we'll start off with understanding the 17th century, the historical context, the literary context, where the primary practitioners, and the different concept of metaphysical poetry that has been formulated and by Drummond, Dryden, Johnson, Grierson, Eliot, and Williamson. Okay, so if we look at the historical context, we will find that there are a number of events, a number of things were happening in the era, 17th century era. So first we notice that the East India Company was formed in the 1600s. Then we see King James the First becoming the king. Okay, he from 1603 to 1625. One of the most interesting things that was happening during that time is the Hampton Court Conference, which was basically a religious conference. It is interesting because different factions belonging to various religious groups tried to arrive at a common consensus at the Hampton Court Conference. So this was their agenda. Unfortunately, it did not happen. And subsequently, we will find that the gunpowder plot, I'm sure many of you are aware of it, the gunpowder plot was formulated, which meant to kill the king and other courtiers, but thankfully that also didn't succeed. Then we also have William Harvey's discovering the circulation of blood. So what is there inside our own body, we were able to scientifically understand. So why is these things important? Because when we're examining metaphysical poetry and the kind of conceits and wit that is used, you will find that there is a scientific side to it. Right. So that is why the William Harvey's discovery of the circulation of blood and the establishment of the Royal Society in 1662, these are very important to know as a background on which metaphysical poetry was formed. Again, politically also, we will see that there are many things that were happening at the same time. There was a war with Spain in 1624. Now, King Charles the First came in 1625, 1649. At aside, there was the Irish Revolution going on in 1641. There were three civil wars punctuated 1642 to 1651, and the Commonwealth was formulated 1649, 1660, which ended with the accession of King Charles II in 1660 to 1685. So a lot of things, many things. The historical context is very rich for the metaphysical poets, the metaphysical poetry to thrive on, right? So now let us move on to the literary context. It is also interesting to see that the literary context, which is a kind of transition from the Elizabethan poetry to the Jacobean poetry. We find that old stalwarts like Shakespeare, Ben Jonson, Michael Drayton, Samuel Daniel, writing in this period as well. They haven't stopped writing, they're still writing. The remarkable event also, which one should keep in mind during this time that happened, was the publication of the authorized version of the Bible, which is 1611. Another interesting point that we have to notice is the rise of popular sermons from remarkable priests like Lancelot Andrewes and John Donne. Now, John Donne is also one of the most primary practitioner of metaphysical poetry. So we have actually three different groups of poets writing in this particular 17th century, three different. Who are they? Poets from Jacobean period, Caroline period, and also this Commonwealth period where we have cavalier poets supporting the monarchy. Similarly, we also have poets who write for the court and poets who write for the church. So we have both secular poetry and religious poetry at this time, right? So we look at the practitioners. Who are they? John Donne, George Herbert, Andrew Marvell, Abraham Cowley. Why is his name in red? I'll comment on that also later on. Richard Crashaw, Henry Vaughan, and minor poets like George Chapman and Richard Lane. Well, I have highlighted Abraham Cowley because we have to pay some special attention to him because the life of Cowley by Dr. Johnson. So he has written a book on the life of Cowley, right? So he didn't think that Donne to be that important. He did not give Donne that importance, but Cowley received that kind of importance from Dr. Samuel Johnson. And we will also be later on be discussing one of Abraham Cowley's poem in this time together with us to understand the different aspects of metaphysical poetry also. Okay, so let us now focus on the origin of the term, right? So how did the term metaphysical poetry originate? So there are few proponents of that. That is Drummond, Dryden, Johnson, Grierson, Eliot, and Williamson. So William Drummond of Hawthornden, he wrote a letter in 1630 to one Dr. Arthur Johnstone, and he used the expression metaphysical pejoratively, that is negatively. He objected to metaphysical ideas and scholastic quiddities in his contemporaries, particularly poet, the extreme kind of image idiosyncrasies that he noticed in his colleagues, he did not appreciate. So he was not appreciative of it. when he used the term metaphysical, it was not in appreciation of it. Next is when we have John Dryden writing in Discourse Concerning the Original and Progress of Satire in 1693. He mentioned, with reference to John Donne, that Donne affects metaphysics. He had this in his mind when he wrote this phrase, affects the metaphysics. Donne was using a number of scientific terms. That is why it was so important to understand the historical context, to understand the scientific fervor of the time, how science was developing, the establishment of Royal Society of Science. It was important, right? So Donne was using a number of scientific terms, and he was making obscure arguments of scholastic philosophers, and so Dryden also did not use the term very happily. So all this, you might say, is a critique of the metaphysical. None of them are in praise. Nobody is praising. Nobody is understanding innately what metaphysical poets are trying to convey through their poetry. Why are the conceits important? What is the significance of wit? Why is the style argumentative in nature? None of it was appreciated, right? So if we look into the term, originally the term, it's people, there is a little bit of argument whether it was Drummond who first used it or John Dryden, but it is popularly taken, and at that metaphysical poetry was coined by John Dryden and later popularized by Samuel Johnson in his book Lives of the Most Eminent English Poets, 1179 to 1781. Okay, so let's try and understand more about the metaphysical poetry and try to understand the different features. So the word meta means beyond, and physical means physical nature. So metaphysical poetry means poetry that goes beyond the physical world of the sense and explores the spiritual world. Having said this, remember that Drummond or Dryden, when they were using the word metaphysical, didn't actually hit on this by the time. It is not so. It's only with Grierson that we will find that there is a different kind of definition for metaphysics, right? So metaphysical poetry refers to a type of intellectual poetry. You can say that this concept, metaphysical poetry, does not rely on any subject or thing. It actually refers to the way in which the poem was written. It focused on the manner of writing, right? So it is a type of poetry which dealt with abstract or philosophical subjects. For example, love, religion, God, beauty, faith, and so on. Okay, and to even dwell on this, to delve on this abstract, philosophical subjects, the practitioners of metaphysical poetry also used very abstract concepts, a very abstract way of describing it, which at that time did not actually set well. Okay, so what are the features? If we look into the features of metaphysical poetry, so metaphysical poetry means the poetry which was addicted to witty conceits and far-fetched imagery. This witty conceits and the far-fetched imagery is the problem of the time. So, you will have actually Johnson was complaining about the poets who were using such extreme expressions, images, symbols, which disturbed the common senses. For example, he wrote in a passage, wit, abstracted from its effects upon the hearer, may be more rigorously and philosophically considered as a kind of discordia concours. So when we will be discussing Abraham Colley's poem, we will find discordia concours. What exactly, where is this discordia concours? What does it mean? So it means a combination of dissimilar images or discovery of occult resemblance in things apparently unlike, not at all like each other, and but still they have been yoked together. The most heterogeneous ideas are yoked by violence together, by violence, not naturally, but some kind of violence together. Nature and art are ransacked for illustrations, comparisons, and allusions. Look at the choice of words and adjectives that Samuel Johnson has used over here to, describe the metaphysics. So probably Johnson was also affected by this kind of far-fetched images, and that is why he is using that violent image himself, ransacking nature and art of illustration, comparisons, and illusions. So this phrase, the most heterogeneous idea yoked by violence together, is the soul of metaphysical poetry. Why? Because the far-fetched needs of the imagery and how yet they are put together to convey a message very powerfully, and philosophically as well, spiritually as well, right? But as I'm trying to say that at that time with Samuel Johnson, from a person like Samuel Johnson, it was very difficult for him to understand, fathom the disparity. So this term metaphysical implies a process of dry reasoning, a speculation about the nature of universe and problems of life and death. Metaphysical poetry is direct, sensuous apprehension of thought or recreation of thought into feeling. This is something which we will see in John Donne. Okay. So yes, let us now. This is basically there's a volume by Abraham Cowley called entitled the Mysteries, and in this volume he has a poem called the Heartbreaking, and in this Heartbreaking has this kind of combination of images. For example, serpents, love, poison, remedy, monarch, tyrant, all this in all these 5 stanzas that you see over here. So disparate things are brought together with violent images and violently yoked together. You can see in these 5 stanzas now. So let us just, start reading the poem. It says, "It gave a piteous groan, and so it broke. In vain if something would have spoke. The love within too strong for it was, like poison put into a Venice glass. I thought that this some remedy might prove, but oh, the mighty serpent love, cut by this chance in pieces small, in all still lived, and still it stung in all." The next 3 stanzas now, where you can find the juxtaposition of dissimilar images, that is discordia concords. So that's what I was talking about earlier. So then if you look at the next 3 stanzas, it becomes very evident. "And now, alas, each little broken part feels a whole pain of all my heart, and every smallest corner still lives with the torment which the whole did kill. Even so rude armies, when the field they quit, and into several quarters get, each troop does spoil and ruin more, and all join in one body did before. How many loves reign in my bosom now? How many loves yet all of you? Thus I have changed with evil fate my monarch love into a tyrant state." So various images, what you see over here, we see that various images from the serpent, love, poison, remedy, monarch, tyrant, and in between we have rude armies, armies which are not controlled, moving in different directions. So the poet says he has different loves, but all of them finally turn into a tyrant state. He suffers more, so his heart is broken. It is not surprising, therefore, for Johnson found this to be discordant for his ears. I hope that through this example, I've been able to point out what and why, Samuel Johnson, Dryden, when they were using the term metaphysical, they were doing so in a negative sense, more pejoratively than in a appreciative tone, right? So Please do tell me if I'm going fast. Is it okay?
Yeah, absolutely fine. Please carry on.
So there's a, it's already 6:29 and I have to finish. So okay, so let us look into, let us reiterate once again the main features of metaphysical poetry. So main features of metaphysical poetry include skillful use of wit and conceit, exhibition of learning, harsh versification, passionate thoughts, religious and dramatic elements, directness of speech, abrupt beginning, harsh rhythm, scientific speculations, and ordinary speech mixed with puns, paradoxes, colloquial language, argumentative presentation of emotions, and daring imagery or metaphysical concepts. Now, we will be taking up all these points over here, and through um, John Donne, I'm trying to give you as many examples as possible for you to understand how it is. But as we know, the time over here is restricted, and there's a lot. So even when I give you the examples, to understand the context fully, I would urge everyone over here to go back, read the poem themselves, because I'll not be able to go line by line for all the poems. I'll just give you the examples and show you the exact lines. But I will urge that you go back and read the poems to understand. So, and if you do it immediately after the lecture, I think it will be most helpful. Okay, having said that, let's just go ahead. So now we have Grierson's publications, which basically changed the face of metaphysical poetry. It happened around 1921. So H.J.C. Grierson was a Scottish scholar, and he was interested in 17th century poetry. He was a critic, an anthologist, and a historian of English poetry. He has published many collections of poems by various writers, including Blake and Tennyson as well. So he came out with an anthology of 17th century poems in 1921 called Metaphysical Lyrics and Poems of the 17th Century. And in fact, T.S. Eliot reviewed this volume of metaphysical lyrics and poems of the 17th century for Times Literary Supplement. And with the publication of this volume and the review of T.S. Eliot, there was a strong revival of metaphysical poetry in the 20th century. So Drummond, Dryden, and Samuel Johnson, their experience with metaphysical poetry was of a different flavor. Metaphysical poetry, as we read, understand, imbibe, and probably can also apply in today's generation as well, is mainly through the appreciation, the critical analysis that we find in the work of Grierson and Eliot. Okay, so in his introduction to the volume that I was talking about, Grierson classified metaphysical poetry in two groups. One is Dante's kind of writing, where we have a philosophical conception of universe, and the second kind of poem written by Donne and his colleague. So remember, again, Samuel Johnson did not give Donne the respect that probably he did not think Donne, rather let me just put it in this way, that he did not think Donne to be a very serious practitioner of poetry. Whereas Grierson, we find that when he has tried to classify metaphysical poetry, he has said that there are two kinds. One, Dante's kind of writing, we have philosophical conception of universe, and the second we find in the poem of Donne, mainly Donne and his colleague. So Grierson is referring to Donne's metaphysical poetry with reference to a few features. They are intellectual, witty, argumentative, subtle, passionate, thoughtful, and exotic. And in fact, these are the same features that we find in almost all the metaphysical poets writing, right? So these are the common features that Grierson noticed in the metaphysical poetry of the 17th century. So what, according to Grierson, we find that metaphysical poetry has been inspired by philosophical conception of universe and of the role assigned to the human spirit in this life. It arises when the physical world loses its stability and the people lose faith in the orthodox thought and belief. At such times, sensitive poets like Donne turn inwards and aim at a better understanding of themselves and the world around them. So this wit, this subtleness, this argumentative way of formulating a poem, this thoughtful exoticness, this witty concepts, these far-fetched imageries, all but require when one loses, the physical world loses its stability and people lose faith in the orthodox thoughts and beliefs. So no more ordinary concepts can be considered. No more ordinary concepts can work to convey that message. Therefore, Grierson tries to say that is why we have this Discordia Concord. Right. So now let us look at Eliot. So Eliot observed, so in in a review of Grierson's volumes, Eliot noted a blend of thought and feeling in Donne and other poets. He called it unified sensibility. So he said a thought of Donne was an experience. It modified his sensibility. So what Eliot emphasized in this unified sensibility is thinking and feeling going together, making up these metaphysical poets. Thinking and feeling going together, making up these metaphysical poets. Eliot also observed a dissociation of sensibility. We must all be aware of this term. In the 17th century, particularly after Donne. In early 20th century, many modernist poets started writing like metaphysical poet, or Eliot found a similarity between metaphysical poetry and the 20th century poets, particularly modernist poets, in terms of telescoping of images and multiple associations. Eliot himself have done it, right? In many of his poems, take the love story of J.W. Prufrock, everywhere you will find that. Actually, Eliot was cultivating his own taste of poetry and creating a different kind of readership for modernist poetry in early 20th century. Something in early era of 17th century still found its actual relevance in the 20th century writers. They understood why it is so. They understood the concepts, something which was jarring during the 17th century for critics like Samuel Johnson, found an entirely different kind of definition in the 20th century, in none other but in the hands and words of T.S. Eliot himself. So now we will look into Williamson's exposition. So later we have a critic, he's called George Williamson. He also discussed metaphysical poetry. So according to him, the crux of metaphysical poetry is wit. So all this, so everybody is emphasizing in this one thing, wit. And this wit is understood by various critics in different ways. For Grierson, wit is a peculiar blend of thought and passion. For Eliot, it is sensuous apprehension of thoughts. For Herbert Reed, it is emotional apprehension of thought. And for Williamson himself, wit is an embodiment of thought. So this wit manifests in concepts of far-fetched and shockingly disparate elements. So this shocking element is something noticeable, and it is appreciated by early 20th century poets like Eliot, which was not liked by Dr. Johnson. I'm reiterating this again and again because I really want this to be one of the takeaways. You have to understand when and how this entire definition of metaphysical poetry and the importance of the concepts and wit was rediscovered. Okay. Williamson also observed that this metaphysical poetry was a kind of revolt against the Elizabethan poetic convention. In contrast to Elizabethan poetry, metaphysical poetry is more complex, sensuous, and it had more intellectual strain. The effect of all these critical thoughts in course of time is what Johnson considered vices turned out to be virtues and appreciated later on. Let me repeat myself once again. Williamson also observed that this metaphysical poetry was a kind of revolt against the Elizabethan poetic conventions. In contrast to Elizabethan poetry, metaphysical poetry is more complex, sensuous, and it had more intellectual strain. The effect of these critical thoughts in course of time is what Johnson considered vices turned out to be virtues and appreciated later on. Till this, is it clear to everyone? Up till this, should I go ahead? If I get a thumbs up or something of that
Yes,
sort.
please. Yes, please.
Okay. So because if somebody wants some clarification or something, I could have done it, but nonetheless.
That will be done at the end of the lecture.
Okay. So let's proceed. So types and themes, let's discuss on the types and themes over here. Okay. So the metaphysical poets turned away from long old-fashioned works of Spenserians and concentrated their efforts on short poems and lyrics dealing with the themes of love of woman and love or fear of God. Often poems are presented in the form of arguments. As I've already said, these are the basic broad themes, types and themes, and this will be discussed with, we'll take examples from John Donne. Okay, moving on. John Donne as a metaphysical poet. So John Donne can be considered as the leader and founder of the metaphysical school of poetry. Donne's poetry is intellectual in nature. It is replete with witty conceits. It is full of imagery, dramatic elements, directness of speech, and harsh rhythm. The best known works that I think are The Progress of the Soul, An Anatomy of the World, An Elegy, and Epithalamium. And Donne's poetry is characterized by intellect in which emotions are fused. Donne passionately feels a thought and experiences it intensely. And that is why T.S. Eliot says, a thought of Donne was an experience. It modified his sensibility, right? So combination of thought and feeling, let us look into that. So metaphysical poetry is a blend of passion and thought. So T.S. Eliot thinks that passionate thinking is the chief mark of metaphysical poetry. So there is an intellectual analysis of emotion in Donne's poetry. Though every lyric arises out of some emotional situation, the emotion is not merely expressed, rather it is analyzed. The emotion is analyzed, not merely expressed, but it is analyzed. So Donne's poems, in Donne's poem, okay, a valediction forbidding mourning proves that lovers need not mourn at parting. For example, he says, so let us melt and make no noise, no tear floods, nor sigh tempests move. It were profanation of our joy to tell the lady our love. So please go back. This is why I'm urging you, go back and trying and figure out where this invalid action, forbidding mourning, where these lines are, so as to understand the context well. The major quality of metaphysical poetry is combination of thought and feeling. So as long as we are with Donne, I will be reiterating the word thought and feeling. So, and Donne is a master of presenting together different objects which have a remote similarity between them. He connects the abstracts with concrete, the remote with the near, and the physical with the commonplace, right? So again, in The Sun Rising, Donne considers his beloved and center of universe. Beloved as the center of universe. This feeling is conveyed how? Look at how it is conveyed. By making the sun revolve round their room. Shine here to us, and thou art everywhere. This bed thy center is, thy walls, these walls thy sphere. Right? So in Donne's metaphysical poetry, emotions are shaped by logical reasoning. How wonderful it is. Emotions are shaped by logical reasoning. So therefore, Grierson in metaphysical poetry, according to Grierson, so we have exhibited deductive reasoning carried to a high pitch. Donne's poetry expresses his extensive learning. He was a very, very well-read person. So he was well-versed in medieval science, logic, theology, law, and medicine, but at his command, his mobile imagination, therefore his imagination was very, very mobile. He could lucidly use different kind of imageries to convey his feelings, to convey his thoughts in a logical manner. Imagination could draw images from almost every field. So metaphysical concepts, if you look at metaphysical concepts, the fondness for concepts is one of major characteristics of metaphysical poetry. Donne makes use of daring imagery or metaphysical concepts. His wit and conceits show his deep learning. The range of his imagery is vast. He compares his face and the face of his beloved to two hemispheres, which make a globe, but the world they build together is superior to the earthly globe. For example, in Good Morrow, he says, my face in thine eye, thine in mine appears. Where can we find two better hemispheres? Next, Donne often uses fantastic comparisons as well. So the most striking and famous one used by Donne is a comparison of a man who travels and his beloved who stays at home to a pair of compasses in the poem The Valediction Forbidding Mourning. I do not know if you're aware of this, but mostly you probably will be aware of it. So it goes like this. If they be two, they are two so, as stiff twin compasses are two. Thy soul, the fixed foot, makes no show to move, but doth if the other do. Thy firmness makes my circle just. So their love is firm. It's like a compass. Maybe the other one is away. If you have seen a compass, in your geometry classes, so you know how it works. So one stays and the other moves around, but still you can make a firmness, a firm circle out of it. They are never apart, but they are locked somewhere together. That is what love is. Very, very interesting imagery, I must say. So use of wit, John Donne is passionately witty and wittily passionate. So and Leishman is impressed by Donne's poetry and considers him the monarch of wit. Carrier says in his elegy on Donne, it's very important to understand that why he is called the master builder of wit. Here lies a king that ruled as he thought fit, the universal monarchy of wit. Okay, so let us look at some of his finest illustration of John Donne's wit. So in the poem The Flea, it says, this flea is you and I, and this our marriage bed and marriage temple is. Again, in the poem The Sun Rising, glorifying his beloved, he implies metaphysical wit and extravagant concepts when Donne says, She is all states and all princes. I nothing else is. Lovely. Now, there are use of colloquial speeches also in metaphysical poetry, and Donne has also practiced it. So, use of colloquial speech is another element of dance metaphysical poetry, though I am saying dance metaphysical poetry because I am taking Donne's work to understand the metaphysical poetry and features of it. But again, it is, you will find the same features in almost all. At the end of the module of it, metaphysical poetry, I'll also be discussing another poet. Will find the same kind of concepts, imageries with him as well. Now, this is especially apparent in the abrupt, dramatic, and conversational opening in many of the dance poems. For example, in the canonization, we see, "For God's sake, hold thy tongue and let me laugh," right? In a colloquial way of speaking. Now, let us look into argumentative style. So, metaphysical poetry is a fusion of passionate feelings and logical arguments. Argumentative manner of speech is another element of dance poetry. He often tries to prove his statements through solid arguments, right? Following are some examples. So let us look at the examples from Good Morrow. "If our two loves be one, or thou and I, love so alike, and none do slacken, none can die." Lover's Infiniteness. "If yet I have not all thy love, dear, I shall never have it all." So again, I beseech that you will go back and read these poems to understand. "Sweetest life I do not go, they who one another keep, alive never parted be." A valediction of weeping. "Since thou and I sigh one another's bread, whoever sighs most is cruelest and hates the other's death." The prohibition. "Love me that I may die the gentler way. Hate me because thy love is too great for me. To let me love, O love, and hate me too." So the paradoxes that we find in dance poetry is replete. So his poetry is replete with paradoxes and strange contradictions. Sometimes he is too blunt that he opposes, chides, and starts blaming and even cursing his beloved. And on the other hand, in flattery, he left Petrarch behind. In flattery, when he's flattering, he can leave Petrarch behind, but some of the verses in which you will find that he's almost, he's blunt, he's chiding, he's blaming, he's almost scolding. So it is because Donne is so passionate, and whatever he thinks, he expresses and it affects. Examples of paradox in his song, "Go and Catch a Falling Star," Donne claims, "and swear nowhere lives a woman true and fair." Contradictory to this, he asserts in "The Sun Rising," "She's all states and all princes I, nothing else is." Similar in his this song, "Sweet love, I do not go," Donne says, "that art the best of me." In Relic, again, you will find Donne saying, "All measure and all language I should pass, should I tell what a miracle she was." So kindly, kind of jot down this lines over here. So affectations and hyperbolic expressions. Let us discuss the affectations and hyperbolic expressions, which is a characteristic of metaphysical poetry. It is often hard to find natural grace in metaphysical writing, abounding in artificiality of thought and hyperbolic expression. For instance, see the lines from the valediction forbidding mourning. "To our souls, therefore, which are one, though I must go, endure not yet a breach, but an expansion, like gold to air, thinnest beat." Exaggeration is another important element in dance poetry. This exaggeration appears to be cruel in its high-spiritedness when he says, "Go and catch a falling star," get the child, a mandrake root, find this kind of exaggeration. The style. So the last and the most important feature of Dan's metaphysical poetry is its language of style. Dan uses simple and common language. For example, the critic Lego says he did not feel any necessity of mentioning gods and goddesses in his poetry. He rejected all the conventional and traditional poetic devices. On the whole, simple words are used unexpectedly. So through all the examples that I showed before, you will find that they are nothing very erudite in nature. None of the words are so. None of them are very ornamental in nature, right? It's a very commonplace words that they have used. So the diction is simple, yet words are combined. It is basically the combination of the words in unexpected way, and thus is a strange compound or form. It is mostly in the combination, the imagery, the wit, the hyperbolic expressions, the exaggerations, the style, therefore, that is used, which is on a makes metaphysical poetry what metaphysical poetry is. You will find that it's very, very different from any kind, any other poetry in any other era. So to sum up, Dan's unconventional approach to love and divine poetry, his combination of thought and feeling and harsh versification, make him a metaphysical poet. The lyrics of the metaphysical poems are fantastic and peculiar. So according to A.C. Ward, the metaphysical style is a combination of two elements, the fantastic form and style and the incongruous in matter and manner. So therefore, so far we discussed the salient features of metaphysical poetry. It is proved that Dan is great metaphysical poetry. There's no doubt about it. He likes this kind of poetry because it produces a beautiful blend of two, that is the heart and mind, religion and love. This contribution of metaphysical poets to English literature is immense. What do they show? They show the spiritual and moral fervor of Puritans, as well as the frank amorous tendency of Elizabethan. Metaphysical poets gave us the best religious poetry as well. In this field of love poetry, they gave us different, cynical, platonic, Petrarchan, and amorous moods. They gave colloquialism to verse, right? They gave intellectuality to the English poetry. Now, we will be going through to his poem Mistress by Andrew Marvell. We will be reading this poem as well together to understand the metaphysical poets and the wit, the different features that I have been talking about till now. So he started. So if we just to give a brief introduction about Andrew Marvell, he started in Cambridge University and then became a tutor to the daughter of Lord Fairfax. Later on, he became an assistant to John Milton. With his help, he became an officer in Cromwell's government. He was also a member of Parliament from Hull, Hull, Hull. In his own lifetime, Marvell was known as a public servant and not a poet. He was growing up in a Puritan environment, but he has written one of the best erotic poems in English. Most of his poems were published after his death in 1681. So he was not, at his time known to be a poet, but rather a public servant. Later on in 19th century, we have Blake and Wordsworth receiving the poems of Marvell with some interest. Similarly, the Victorian poet Tennyson also responded to Marvell very enthusiastically. However, with the revival of metaphysical poetry in 20th century by Grierson and Eliot, Marvell became one of the best-known poets of the metaphysical school. To understand Marvell better, We have one essay by T.S. Eliot called Andrew Marvell. If you wish, you can go back and read that as well. It would be nice if you actually read it. So the poem that we will be discussing over here is To His Choir Mistress. As you see, it is in 3 verse paragraphs. The first verse paragraph has 20 lines, the second 12 lines, and the third 14 lines. The third section almost looks like a sonnet, and the last 6 lines summarize the plea, the argument put forward by the speaker in the poem very powerfully. It is also known as a seduction poem, by the way. Okay, so let's just start reading the poem. Had we but world enough and time, this kindness lady were no crime. We would sit down and think which way to talk and pass our lovers' day. Thou by the Indian Ganges side shouldest rubies find. I by the tide of Humber would complain. I would love you 10 years before the flood, and you should, if you please, refuse. Till the conversion of the Jews, my vegetable love should grow vaster than the empires and more slow, and 100 years should go to praise thine eyes and on thy forehead gaze. 200 to adore each breast, but 30,000 to the rest, an age at least to every part. At the last age should show your heart, for lady you deserve this state, nor would I love at lower rate. But at my back I always hear time's winged chariot hurrying near, and wonder all because us lie desert of vast eternity. Thy beauty shall no more be found, nor in the marble wall shall sound my cooing song. Then worm shall try that long preserved virginity, and your quaint honor turn to dust, and into ashes all my lust the graves find a private place, and none I think do there embrace. Now therefore, while thy youthful hue sits on thy skin like morning dew, and while thy willing soul transpires at every pore with instant fires, now let us sport us while we may, and now, like amorous birds of prey, rather at once our time devour than languish in this slow chapped power. Let us roll all our strength and all our sweetness up in one ball, and tear our pleasures with rough strife through the iron gates of life. Thus, though we cannot make our son stand still yet, we will make him run. So if we look at the thematic contrast, we will find that there's love, life is opposed to death. So there's quite a contrast between two basic ideas, two possible opposite ideas. One is life, another is death. Life is known by this love. Love and life, they go together, and what they do, they oppose death. So death is a reality, right? So what are we to do? Let us live and love physically as well. Why platonically alone? That's the poet is trying to say, that why to love platonically alone? So use a given charm, we are made beautiful. Why not use our physical charm to live our life happily? That is what the poet addresses the lady with this plea. The plea is this. So we can wait till we agree. We can quarrel and wait for a long time, but then time flies. Time knocks at the door. So why waste your beauty? Which anyway would turn into dust. Procreation is one of the best ways to leave some trace in this world. In fact, when poets did not find this procreation successful, particularly Shakespeare, for example, in his sonnets, he suggests the idea of poetic creation. It actually happens in his poem. So procreation or poetic creation is a way to conquer time. So he tells the lady, the poet tells the lady not to be coy, okay, to his coy mistress, not to be coy. It is a crime. Being coy is a crime. It is a crime against what? Against time. And what is the punishment therefore? The punishment therefore is nothing but death, demolition. That is, if you are coy, there is a punishment and you will face death and you will not be found anywhere. There is no trace of you, right? So once you're dead and you're turned into dust, there will be no trace of you at all. And there is an implied listener who does not listen at all, because we do not know over here. There is no response from the listener's side. So we do not know. So implied a listener, whether she's listening at all or not. So we find the poet to be simply speaking and persuading, right? And all his rhetorical flourish does not, it seems that does not bring about any kind of reply or response from the lady, right? Let us look at the poetic devices that are used. So such a powerful poem that To His Coy Mistress is, it employs many poetic devices, right from apostrophe to assonance. For example, address to an absent lady is basically an apostrophe. And this is an address to a lady, an absent lady, right? So we do not see her. We do not find her voice. So when this poem is used as a rhetorical strategy to persuade the lady, naturally we find a hyperbole as well. So we will, for example, in the lines 5 and 7, if you see, love from two different continents and would love in the past and future too, right? So they're hyperbole from different continents, the lady from Indian Ganges and the man from English Humber. So they can continue to love from different locations, but that will not help them because they do not have enough time. So therefore we see the use of hyperbole over here. He also suggests that he could live in the past, live in future also, and live and love eternally. But this eternal love will not bring them together physically to enjoy the consummate nature of life, right? So he uses some metaphors like vegetable love, right? In line number 11, you will find vegetable love. Again, in line number 26, you will find marble vault, right? There are some similes also, like morning dew in line number 34. Again, like amorous birds of prey in line number 38. So he also uses metaphors, as I said, and he uses similes as well. And then we find hyperbaton also, like for example, in line number 39, our time devour. Is actual phrase used, but it would be devouring our time. The whole poem is a conceit in the sense of praising the body or even sex as canonization poem did, right? So personification and symbol we have through this time. Time, therefore, it is not just time. It's a person, it's a winged chariot. It's a chariot or a charioteer with a wing flying fast. So we have alliteration like private place, assonance, I by the tide. We have such words and phrases throughout the poem, like I by the tide, which you will find in line number 6. So, in fact, this poem has a very interesting structural pattern also. If we look into the structure, rhyme, and rhythm, so it's a very interesting structural pattern. This poem is considered to be in the form of an ode, addressing a lady in the form of dramatic monologue, including a sonnet addressing a lady who does not oblige to listen to the speaker. Like the Elizabethan Petrarchan sonnet, Marvel is praising, celebrating the beauty of the lady, and the lady is absolutely reticent. So we also have 3-part structure over here: the strophe, antistrophe, and epod, as in the form of an ode. So as we said, there is a speaker, the poet, he is appealing to the lady who is listening without responding. The whole poem is in the form of a couplet. So we have 46 lines, that means we have 23 couplets. The poem, again, this is very interesting, is in iambic measure, specifically tetrameter. So when we have 1 foot less from penta, we have this tetrameter, and this tetrameter actually indicates flying time, the fast movement of time. So the whole poem, the pace of the poem will be faster when you are using iambic tetrameter instead of pentameter. Okay, so we have this caesura also in the last 2 lines. Thus stand still. There is a pause. We have run on lines in the first line, the third line, and also in the 5th line. And all our sweet rough strife through the our sun stands still. We have end stop line at the end of a full stop. So we have also a comma at the end of the line to indicate this pause. This is a powerful poem, and this iambic tetrameter about love, about the power of love from a man to a woman. So if we now look at the overall impression, we will consider it to be an extraordinarily lyrical poem of love. The main reason is time, that it is not at our disposal. We are subject to time. One day we will be buried and worms will eat you, and as well as me, we will turn into dust. That is the biblical idea we have in this poem as well, a kind of allusion to biblical idea of human being turning into dust. It attempts to impress upon the lady to live life fully and then die, rather than without living, reproducing a son, against the sun, S-U-N, sun. The language of the poem is hyperbolic and paradoxical to convey the urgency of overcoming the limitations of time. It is the human beings who are more often worried about the power of time and passage of time. The poet of the speaker is not at all coy about being explicit in persuading the lady to have this physical enjoyment. It is a brilliantly constructed rhetorical poem, as we saw the number of poetic devices used by the poet. There can be several readings of to his choir mistress. I'll try to touch upon 3 reading. One is logical reading. There can be post-structuralist reading and a feminist reading as well. So if we so one reading, as I was saying, the first one that we will be doing is the logical reading, because it uses a number of logical strategies. The syllogist structure is found in this poem. There is a 3-part structure in any syllogism: major premise, minor premise, and conclusion or inference from these two, the major premise and the minor premise, right? So the major premise we can have: had we but world enough and time, thy coyness, lady, were no crime. That's the major premise. What is the minor premise? But at my back I always hear time's winged chariot hurrying near. Therefore, the conclusion or the inference: now therefore, while the youthful hue sits on thy skin like morning dew, now let us sport us while we may. Right? So we have this reading. This reading is by some critic called Lowe and Pival. So we have this reference at the end. The major ideas, as we said: had we but world enough and time, this coyness lady were no crime. Coyness is a crime because we do not have time. The shyness, the reserved nature of this lady is a crime against time. The minor premise, as I've already mentioned: but at my back I always hear time's winged chariot hurrying near. On the one hand, you are reserved, you are not responding to the plea of the man. On the other hand, time is calling. So the conclusion of these 2 statements is therefore: now therefore, while the youthful hue sits on thy skin like morning dew, now let us sport us while we may. Sport of love, sport of life. Take it seriously and live life happily. That is what the poem concludes through this logical structure. So on the one hand, we have this logical exposition. On the other hand, we have this emotional appeal to the lady. That is where we have this logical and rhetorical coming together to make up this poem a great poem indeed. So we have a powerful imagery of the vegetable love turning into minerals, and then animal levels. What is the use of turning into this animal dust mineral level without enjoying life at all? Okay, now we will look into post-structuralist reading of the poem, and we'll end with a feminist reading as well. Okay. Um, Dr. Shoikat, can I take a little break and we'll have a little bit of water? Is it okay?
Of course you can. Please.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Just a moment, please. Post. The very interesting post-structuralist reading of this poem is given by a critic called Catherine Belze in her essay. So Belze contextualizes the poem in the tradition of Danse Macabre using Philip Arry's study of attitudes to death in his book, The Hour of Our Death, which was published in 1983. So in the Middle Age, death was an everyday phenomenon in public mourning. People would mingle, find out death happening every day. Death would not be hidden from people. It was a public event. In the Renaissance, we noticed that death was not such a great public event. This was shown in paintings and collections of antique things as well, if you are aware. And in the 17th century, the contact with death become a little less, only shown in antique collections in the form of skulls and weapons. And similarly, in the 18th and the 19th century, we find further progress in the sense of detachment or running away from the idea of death. In the 19th century, death was denied because it was considered to be a gateway to heaven. And in 20th century, death was not at all seen in public life. At least this is an idea that we have in the European context, this denial of death as a private affair. If somebody died, it was a private affair and no one would bother about it. But in the 20th century or in the 21st century, we see that there is a technological war with or against death, and we are also living in the time of the COVID-19. So we know that death is no more something which we can be ignorant about. It is in the absolute public realm. So all kind of instruments are produced, created to keep death away. And in this, we have market forces, companies, factories, scientists, technologies being invented to banish death, to remove death from our lives, right? All these vaccines and first dose, second dose, booster, whatnot. Death is reality. That is what religion tells us. So therefore, in 20th century, market forces try to banish death from our lives without realizing death is a reality that we have to face. However you try to, even at the face of COVID-19, however you try to keep it away, it is still there. So Andrew Marvell was right when he says that I can hear the charioteer right behind me. Death, time, knocking will turn my material body nothing but dust. Now let us look into the feminist reading. Actually, it is a response to feminist critics to this text of male desire. So a male speaker desires the body of a woman. That is why it is called a text of male desire, right? So a man wishes to defeat time by the genealogical narrative of transmission from father to son. For that, a woman is required, right? Procreation, a woman is required. The woman does not have any voice. This is the feminist reading, try and understand. Does not have any voice. She's just the listener. She's listening. She has no voice. No voice is given. She is the opportunity or a chance to resist this male desire by protecting her virginity. She can remain an unmarried or she can remain an untouched woman by a male. So she can remain pure. She has a choice to say no to the male desire. She need not participate in this procreation of life with a man. According to some of these feminist critics, they say the mistress must resist, and the female reader should also resist the male text and male critical practice of reading and glorifying the man's love for a woman. So such a kind of approach is given to us in a book called A Handbook of Critical Approaches to Literature. If you wish, you can go back and read it. So one resisting reader, the concept of resisting reader is applied, particularly for a woman. A woman should be resisting the reader. That resistance must be to male desire, male practice over here, right? This is the most important and interesting of all the responses that we have of Andrew Marvell. There is an American poet by the name Annie Finch, and she has the same title, Coy Mistress, and she has a short poem of 16 lines. It is actually a continuation of Marvell's poem. It's a kind of a sequel, you may say. So what would be a poem like if the lady responded, right? So there is no response. Till Andrew Marvell has not given a response of the lady. The lady in his poem is reticent. There is no, we do not know what the lady wishes, but over here, the American poet Annie Finch has brought out a sequel, Coy Mistress, name same, and the speaker addresses the speaker of Marvell's poem. So I'm just quoting, it's just a 16 line poem. So let me just go, just tell you. Sir, I am not a bird of prey. A lady does not seize the day. I trust that brief time will unfold our youth before he makes us old. How could we two write lines of rhyme were we not found of numbered time, and grateful to the vast and sweet trials his day will make us meet, right? So just keep on praising, do not bother about me. That is what Annie Finch's speaker tells the speaker of Andrew Marvell. We have a beautiful video of this reading as well, I think. So if you go to the YouTube, you can find that reading. It's beautifully done. So if we try to summarize to his Coy Mistress, it deals with the problem of time for human beings, particularly young people who want to live life fully, physically, with enjoyment. The speaker of this poem appeals to a young lady who does not listen to him, so he praises her in different ways. He says he can praise her in so many ways for so many years. Each age can be used to praise her parts of various physical features, but then we find that the lady remains quiet. But the fact of matter is death is common to all. Both the human beings, male or female, will have to die one day, and so seize the day, carpe diem, seize the day. And that is what poet says, but the lady remains quiet. See, we found different reading of this poem, a logical reading, a post-structuralist reading, and a feminist reading. So with this, I will wrap up the metaphysical poets